Welcome to the deep dive. We're digging into a stack of sources today. Articles, notes, accounts, all to pull out the really key stuff for you.
Exactly. We sift through it, connect the dots, and, try to find those nuggets that really get to the heart of the matter.
And today, we are diving into a real enduring mystery, the Kecksburg Incident. This happened in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, way back in 1965.
Yeah, it's quite a story. You've got sightings, a big military response, witnesses describing something, weird, and even a modern legal fight for documents.
So our mission here is to unpack it all. The facts, the theories, what people saw, what the government did or didn't do. Basically what fell out of the sky near that small town.
And why all the secrecy. Let's get into the sources.
Okay, let's paint the picture. December 9th, 1965, middle of the afternoon. Suddenly, this brilliant fireball streaks across the sky.
And this wasn't just, a local thing. Thousands saw it. We're talking Michigan, New York, Virginia.
6 U.S. states, right. And even up into Canada. Windsor, Ontario reported sightings too.
Right, so astronomers at the time, their first thought, understandably, was, okay, probably a bright meteor, maybe a few meteors breaking up. That was the initial take.
But it got more intense pretty quickly. The Associated Press reported flaming bits actually falling.
Yeah, debris coming down, starting small fires on the ground in Ohio and Pennsylvania. So real physical effects.
Definitely not just a light show. And then you zero in on Kecksburg, this little town in Pennsylvania.
Because witnesses there were adamant. They said this thing didn't just burn up, it crashed right into the woods nearby.
We have some really specific witness accounts from the sources, like Ray and Rob Landy, two brothers.
They were outside, saw this thing gliding across the sky. Ray said it was unlike anything he'd ever seen.
And Rob apparently looked at how it was moving and just knew it was going to hit the ground, so they ran towards where they thought it went down.
Then there's Randy Overly. He was just a kid playing near a creek. Heard this deep hissing sound.
A hiss?
Yeah, a deep hiss. And then saw an object coming right at him. Flying super low, he said maybe 200 feet up, and slow, like no faster than a small plane.
Which doesn't sound like a meteor at all.
Not really, no. Meteors are incredibly fast.
And then Nevin and Nadine Kalp, also in Kecksburg, saw it fly right overhead and crash into a ravine nearby.
So you've got multiple independent people in this one small area describing the same thing. Something came down, it landed.
Which naturally kicked off a local response.
Exactly. Volunteer fire departments got the call. The Kecksburg station sent out over 30 guys to search the woods.
And this is where it gets
fast.
Very fast. The sources say the U.S. Army and state police ordered the area sealed off. Immediately.
Roadblocks went up.
Yep, roadblocks keeping people away. Apparently up to 150 onlookers showed up, but they were kept far back from whatever was in those woods.
And one of those volunteer firemen, James Romansky, he was actually on a team that found the site. His account is, it's pretty central. It really is. He described finding this humongous metal object, half buried in the ground.
Humongous, like how big?
He estimated 6, 7, maybe 8 feet around. Maybe 8, 10, 12 feet long.
Yeah.
It was about the size of a VW Beetle.
Okay, so decent size.
Yeah.
And the shape.
This is the detail everyone remembers. He said it looked exactly like a fresh acorn.
An acorn?
A metal acorn. No wings, no engines, no propellers, nothing familiar.
Wow. But wait, there's more, right? The markings.
Yeah. On a kind of bumper-like feature at the bottom, he said there were markings. He described them like ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics.
Hieroglyphics, seriously?
That's what he said. Stars, shapes, figures, circles, lines. He was adamant. To this day, I've never seen anything like it.
So Romansky and the other firemen are there with this acorn.
And then the military shows up.
Army personnel.
And their message was
pretty blunt. According to Romansky, we're in charge. We're taking command. Get out of here.
Just like that. Yep. He said by the time they got back to the fire hall, the place was just wall-to-wall military. Total takeover.
And then accounts start coming out about the object being moved.
Right. Several witnesses reported seeing a military flatbed truck, a tractor trailer, carrying something large, covered with a tarp, leaving the area late that night or early the next morning.
There was a journalist too, Jerry Betters.
Yeah, he had a chilling story. Said soldiers actually aimed rifles at him and his friends, told them to leave right as an army truck with an acorn-shaped object under a tarp was leaving a field.
So intimidation too.
Seems like it. And other witnesses reported being told basically don't talk about this. Some even claimed visits from, the classic Men in Black types afterwards.
It's incredible how quickly the narrative split. You look at the local paper, the Greensburg Tribune-Review, the very next day, December 10th.
Right, the county edition headline screamed, "Unidentified flying object falls near Kecksburg," and Army ropes off area. Pretty clear.
But the city edition, same paper, same day.
Headline, "Searchers failed to find object." Complete opposite.
And that became the official line, didn't it?
Pretty much. Project Blue Book, the Air Force's UFO study group at the time, they chimed in, said, likely a meteor, maybe meteors.
And their search.
They claimed their team searched until about 2 a.m., found nothing, called it off, added it was not picked up by radar. End of story, officially.
So right off the bat, this huge contradiction. You've got firefighters, locals, seeing a physical object, seeing the military take it away.
Under heavy guard.
Versus the official report saying, nope, nothing here.
That disconnect is huge, and it's exactly why this case never went away. It fueled decades of people trying to figure out what really happened.
Which brings us to investigators like Stan Gordon.
Yeah, Stan's been digging into this practically since day one. On the ground, talking to witnesses. He's convinced something of unknown origin came down and the military covered it up.
And his research, interviewing all those people, it backs up the core story, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The slow descent, like it was maybe controlled, not just falling. The consistent description. Metallic acorn, half buried, seen by different people independently.
And that military response.
Exactly. Gordon argues it was way too fast, too big, too secretive for just a meteor or some random space junk. Whatever it was important.
Important enough for armed soldiers. Roadblocks.
Right. And Gordon also mentions reports, though some he says are hard to verify, that NASA people were there too, not just the Army.
So based on all that, what does Gordon think it might have been?
He keeps a couple of main possibilities on the table. One, maybe some kind of advanced secret human tech, a space device, maybe testing re-entry control that, well, failed.
Okay, a secret project gone wrong.
Or, he says you have to consider an extraterrestrial spacecraft.
He goes there.
He includes it as a possibility based on the evidence. He even mentions some intriguing, though he stresses unverifiable, tips he got over the years.
Like what?
Like former NASA contacts, who apparently told him it was actually Soviet. But then also, two separate former military guys who didn't know each other both claim they saw recovery reports labeling it as extraterrestrial.
Wow, okay. That's quite a claim, even if unverifiable.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But Gordon keeps coming back to the witness descriptions of its movement. Slowing down, making turns before impact. That just doesn't fit a meteor profile.
So the big question for him, the one that keeps the mystery alive.
What was so important? Why the massive military operation? Why the decades of seeming secrecy? What were they hiding?
There's that one quote Gordon shared from someone whose relative supposedly worked at the Pentagon and looked into Kecksburg.
Oh yeah, there was more to it than you'll ever know. Chilling, really.
It really is. So fast forward a few decades, people are still asking questions, and then comes investigative journalist Leslie Kean.
Right. Kean becomes a key player in the modern push for answers, specifically trying to get government documents through FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act.
And this effort got a big boost, kind of unexpectedly, from the Sci-Fi Channel, right? Back in 2002.
Yeah, now Sci-Fi. They launched this initiative, led by Larry Landsman, pushing for more government transparency on UFOs generally.
And Kecksburg seemed like a perfect test case.
Exactly. Landsman called it a case worth investigating. He felt Americans had and have the right to know the truth. Basic transparency.
So Leslie Kean, working with this initiative, files a lawsuit against NASA.
Yep, 2003 federal court in D.C. The argument was basically that NASA had promised to search for Kecksburg-related documents, but was now dragging its feet, stonewalling, withholding information.
That lawsuit dragged on for a while.
4 years. They finally reached a settlement in October 2007. NASA had to agree to do a much more thorough court-monitored search, hand over hundreds of documents, and significantly, pay Kean's lawyers' fees like $50 grand.
So, did they find the smoking gun?
Well, the search finished in 2009. Kean wrote a report about it, the conclusion of the NASA lawsuit, and her bottom line was, no smoking gun documents were released. In one way, yes. But Kean argued that what they did get, plus the documents they learned, were missing or destroyed. It actually raised more questions, more contradictions.
Missing or destroyed, we'll come back to that. But she found some interesting stuff.
One thing her reporting highlighted was something called Project Moondust.
Moondust.
Yeah, a real U.S. government program back then focused on examining space objects, specifically non-U.S. ones, or objects of unknown origin. And State Department documents confirmed NASA was involved in recovering space debris.
So NASA had a system for grabbing stuff that fell from space.
Seems like it. After studying everything NASA released, Keene concluded the trail was cold, but with hot caveats, meaning big unresolved issues.
She still believes something landed there, though.
Oh yeah, she's personally convinced something came down and landed in Kecksburg. No doubt in her mind about that part.
But what? Did she lean towards aliens?
She said the extra Earth, the UFO possibility, has to be considered. It can't be ruled out.
But not necessarily the only option.
Right. She looked hard at the idea of a secret U.S. project or something from another country, but she found those unlikely.
Why unlikely?
Her research, using NASA orbital debris data, info from U.S. Space Command, even the Russian Space Agency, it seemed to rule out known satellites, like that Soviet probe, Cosmos 96, we'll talk about.
So if it wasn't Russian, it wasn't likely another country?
Her conclusion boiled down to either a UFO or a secret American device of some sort.
And if it was American?
Then her big question is, why the secrecy still? Why couldn't they tell us about this 40 years later? What could still be so sensitive?
It's a fair question.
She acknowledges the UFO idea is hard for many to accept, but argues it has to be kept in the running. She also speculated, if it was U.S. tech, maybe it was something dangerous, like highly radioactive, needing extreme secrecy.
But for Keene, the biggest takeaway wasn't aliens or secret tech, was it?
No. Her central take-home message, as she put it, was really about the government's lack of transparency.
The whole lawsuit experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She said it highlighted the problems inherent to the use of the Freedom of Information Act in our democracy. It was this long process.
And the important point, she felt, has nothing to do with UFOs. It just points out the problems with the Freedom of Information Act as it stands today. Getting answers can be incredibly hard.
And speaking of problems, those missing records you mentioned, that's a huge part of this.
Right. What happened there?
Okay, so a NASA document found via a more recent FOIA request by the Black Vault website shows NASA sent Kecksburg-related files to the National Archives back in 1967. Standard procedure.
Good.
But by 1987, the archives marked those specific files as lost, gone.
Lost. How does that happen?
Good question. And other files from that period were just destroyed. Routine record cleaning, apparently.
So the paper trail just vanishes at key points.
Pretty much. Judge Sullivan, overseeing Keene's lawsuit in 2007, wasn't satisfied with NASA's explanation for the missing files. He actually ordered them to search again.
Did they find them?
No. NASA's public liaison officer ended up testifying in court that 2 whole boxes of potentially relevant papers from that era were missing. Right. Just gone.
And this isn't the only time NASA has lost important records, is it?
Unfortunately, no. The most famous example is probably some of the original tapes from the Apollo 11 moon landing. It highlights a pattern, maybe, or at least a recurring problem with keeping track of historical records, which makes solving mysteries like Kecksburg even harder.
Definitely. And with official records being incomplete or contradictory, it leaves space for all sorts of conflicting theories to keep circulating.
Absolutely. And probably the main alternative explanation, pushed by official sources sometimes, is the Soviet satellite theory, specifically Cosmos 96.
Right, you mentioned that NASA brought this up in 2005.
Yeah, right before the 40th anniversary. They put out a statement saying their experts had looked at metal fragments from the Kecksburg area way back when and determined they were from a Soviet satellite that broke up on re-entry. But then, the kicker, the records of that analysis were lost sometime in the 80s or 90s.
Conveniently lost records again.
It does raise eyebrows. And that 2005 statement seemed weird for other reasons too.
Like what?
Well, it seemed to contradict NASA's own press release from December 1965, right after the event. Back then, they suggested the fireball's path was too steep for a satellite re-entry, more like a meteor heading for Lake Erie.
So they changed their story.
It looked that way. It also seemed different from what they'd apparently said during that Sci-Fi Channel show in 2003.
But the biggest issue with blaming Cosmos 96 is
the timing. It's just way off.
Yeah.
Cosmos 96, which was a failed Russian Venus probe, it did re-enter Earth's atmosphere on December 9th, 1965.
Okay.
But it happened over Canada, around 3:18 in the morning.
And Kecksburg was?
Late afternoon. Around 4:47 p.m., hours and hours later. Different time, different place.
So it couldn't have been the same event.
Highly unlikely.
Yeah.
Stan Gordon even said he spoke to Russian officials who confirmed Cosmos 96 wasn't what fell in Pennsylvania that afternoon.
And didn't Leslie Kean get an expert to look at the orbital data?
Yeah, Nicholas L. Johnson, a top space debris expert, he analyzed it for her back in 2003. His conclusion was blunt. No part of Cosmos 96 could have landed in Pennsylvania in the local afternoon of 9 December 1965. Case closed on that, scientifically.
Even skeptics seem to agree on that point, right? Like James Oberg.
Right. Oberg, who often debunks UFO claims, looked at the orbital data too. He confirmed the Air Force tracking data for Cosmos 96 was solid and concluded the re-entry and the Kecksburg fireball must have just been unrelated coincidences happening on the same day.
Okay, so Cosmos 96 seems like a dead end. What about the original meteor theory?
Well, that was the first official line. But as Stan Gordon and others point out, the witness accounts, slow speed, low altitude, apparent turns just don't fit how meteors behave. They don't glide or make controlled descents.
So it's not a meteor and not Cosmos 96. What else? Back to the secret U.S. project idea.
That's definitely still on the table for many investigators, including Kean and Gordon, as the most likely conventional explanation if it wasn't extraterrestrial.
Has anyone proposed a specific project?
Some researchers, like John Venetra from MUFON and Owen Eichler, have speculated. Could it have been something like a General Electric Mark II re-entry vehicle?
What's that?
A type of spy satellite capsule used back then. They suggest one might have malfunctioned and fallen out of orbit. But it's pure speculation, they admit. No proof.
And again, if it was U.S. tech, why hide it for almost 60 years?
That remains the big question mark hanging over the secret project theory.
Which inevitably leads back to the extraterrestrial theory.
Yep. As Kean and Gordon both carefully state, based on the evidence, it's a possibility you can't rule out.
The weird shape, the markings, the military recovery.
Stan Gordon's claims about military sources mentioning ET recovery reports, even if unverified, add fuel to that fire for some. The sheer strangeness described by witnesses doesn't fit anything conventional they knew.
Though it's crucial to state NASA's current official stance.
Absolutely, NASA is clear. To date, NASA has yet to find any credible evidence of extraterrestrial life. They don't actively search for UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena, cite lack of good data, and say there's currently no data proving UAPs or UFOs are alien tech.
Standard scientific position. Need extraordinary evidence for extraordinary claims.
Exactly.
Now, the sources also mention a more out-there theory. Something about Nazis.
Ah, yes, the Die Glock theory. This has popped up in popular culture on shows like Nazi UFO Conspiracy and Ancient Alien.
Die Glock, the bell.
Right. The theory posits that the Kecksburg object was actually this alleged secret weapon the Nazis were developing, the bell, which somehow survived the war and crashed decades later in Pennsylvania.
Wait, how would that even work?
It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
Ancient Aliens apparently even tried to compare supposed blueprints of Die Glock to the Acorn-Shaped described in Kecksburg.
But is there any actual historical basis for Die Glock?
That's highly debatable. The sources note that many historians and researchers consider Die Glock itself to be a myth, something made up, not a real historical artifact or project.
So probably more fringe speculation.
Seems that way based on the material. So, at the end of the day, you're left with these competing ideas, none definitively proven. The mystery hangs on because the evidence is incomplete, official records are missing, statements conflict, and the witness testimony remains powerful but hard to verify scientifically.
An unanswered question, as Gordon and Kean both call it.
Precisely.
And you can really see how this whole situation, this ambiguity, turned Kecksburg into, well, Pennsylvania's Roswell. It captured the public imagination.
Definitely. And the media played a huge part in that, especially that Unsolved Mysteries episode in 1990.
That was a big one, wasn't it? Showed the Acorn object, interviewed witnesses.
Yeah, people like John Hayes, who saw it on the flatbed truck. The show leaned heavily into the extraterrestrial angle. And that prop they made for the show, it's actually still there, near the fire station in Kecksburg.
That's amazing. A piece of TV history marking the spot.
And other shows followed. That sci-fi documentary, The New Roswell, UFO Hunters, Ancient Aliens featuring Stan Gordon at the site, in search of aliens.
Plus movies inspired by it, like Kecksburg and The Vast of Night recently, and even a BBC radio drama.
It just keeps resonating. And all that attention has really embedded the incident into the town's culture.
It's part of their identity now.
For sure. You see it with that big space acorn replica they put up near the fire station? It's a tour spot.
And the annual festival.
Yeah, the Kecksburg Old-Fashioned Days and UFO Festival. They embraced the mystery. It put them on the map in a strange way.
So wrapping this deep dive up,
Right.
we started with that fireball seen by thousands.
Then the crash reports, the specific descriptions of that weird acorn object in the woods.
The incredibly fast, secret military recovery, this object taken away on a truck,
Contrasted with the official denials, just a meteor, nothing found.
leading to decades of searching, Stan Gordon's work, Leslie Kean's FOIA lawsuit,
Which highlighted those missing files and the difficulties in getting government transparency.
and leaving us with all these competing theories, meteor, Soviet satellite, secret US project, maybe something truly unknown, even Nazi bells apparently.
And finally, how this whole enduring mystery shaped the legacy of a small Pennsylvania town.
And Leslie Kean's point really sticks, doesn't it? That beyond the specific object, the Kecksburg story is a powerful example of the struggle for information, the limits of FOIA, and the challenge of reconciling citizen accounts with government secrecy.
It really puts the spotlight on how hard it can be to get straight answers, especially decades later when records are gone or stories have changed.
So maybe the final thought for you listening in is this. After nearly 60 years, with consistent witnesses, clear military action, yet missing records and shifting official stories, what does Kecksburg ultimately tell us? Where is that line between what's officially explained away and what remains genuinely, persistently unexplained in our world?
It really does make you wonder, how much truth gets lost to time, or maybe intentionally obscured? A question that lingers long after the fireball fades.
Thanks for diving deep with us into the Kecksburg mystery.